In this video, I want to discuss rolling over your 401k account into a Roth IRA and how that could be advantageous for an individual's position, but more importantly, how to avoid the most common mistakes when somebody's looking to take a rollover from their employer, 401k plan, whether that be an old employer plan, their current employer plan, they just recently retired, something that will give them the qualification to roll those dollars over, and whether to do that into a traditional IRA or do a conversion into a Roth IRA account. At any point in time, if you have questions, feel free to give our 1-800 number a call. It's up on the screen, 1-800-566-1002. Reference this video and ask to speak with an advisor, and we'll be sure to try to help you out the best we can. Really, the crux of everything is to understand the tax difference between a 401k or traditional 401k versus a Roth IRA. A traditional 401k, if you think of this like a bucket, an individual, an employee is adding monies into this account, so that's known as the contributions. The employer may be adding matching money into this account, so that's also part of the contributions. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin that's going to determine whether this bucket is going to grow or it's going to shrink is based on the rate of return that comes back based on the investment options that that individual chose. The amount of contributions that this person is making into their 401k account, that could be pre-tax or tax deductible based on what their ordinary income is for that year. So like as an example, somebody makes $100,000 in a given year and they place $10,000 into their 401k account, their $10,000 could be a tax deduction, meaning that their adjusted gross income at the end of that year would be $90,000. The amount of money was tax deductible initially. The amount of monies are growing in their pre-tax. So you have the power of compound interest between the contributions and the rate of return is growing that bucket. But when it comes time for retirement and they want to start pulling monies from that account, it's going to be fully taxable. So like as an example, let's say somebody grew their 401k account to $1 million by the time that they're hitting retirement age, and they say, okay, I want to take out 50 grand from my 401k bucket. If it's sitting in a traditional 401k, this $50,000 is going to be added as if this person made $50,000 as ordinary income for that year. So that means it's going to be fully taxable. So they're getting the tax deduction now as they're making the contribution. It's growing tax deferred, but when it comes time to retire and they actually have to take withdrawals, all those monies are going to be fully taxable. So that's, essentially the concept of a traditional 401k, or really how a traditional IRA works. Now, a Roth IRA has a very similar mechanism where I want you to conceptually think of it like a bucket. The way that bucket grows is by contributions somebody's making into the plan and the rate of return that's coming back based on, what sort of investments or what sort of safe accumulation accounts or however they have that, Roth IRA account structured. So, but the difference is when somebody's making contributions into this account, it's not going to give you that tax deduction. But the monies that are being placed in there are growing tax-free. The amount of growth within this account is growing tax-free. So when it comes time for retirement, that amount of money, so let's say if somebody had $1 million Roth IRA account, by the time that they hit their retirement years and they want to pull out $50,000, well, that $50,000 would go to them tax-free because they played by the rules of sitting within the Roth IRA chassis. So that's the main difference there, and that's why I want you guys to understand the difference between pre-tax or tax-deferred monies versus tax-free monies. The 401k account is going to grow tax-deferred. It's going to be fully taxable. The Roth IRA account is going to grow tax-free. It's going to be tax-free when an individual is trying to pull out their monies. That sort of concept could be advantageous, obviously, from an income standpoint, but it could also be advantageous from a growth standpoint, an inheritance standpoint, and a few other aspects that an individual might not have thought of. The first most important thing is a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA in general has certain limitations. So with a Roth IRA account, if somebody makes too much money, they cannot make contributions into a Roth IRA. But it doesn't matter if a person is making hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, and let's say that they phase out of a Roth IRA contribution, if they had an old 401k or their current employer 401k and they're eligible for a rollover, they could create a Roth IRA and do something known as a conversion. So it's not going to hinder them by saying, I made too much money this year. An individual could still do a conversion regardless of how much money that they're making into this Roth IRA account. So they could ultimately say, okay, I have my $1 million that's sitting in my 401k account. I want to convert the full thing into a Roth IRA. when they do that conversion, it's taking it from a pre-tax account and is placing it into a tax-free account, which sounds great. Now there's a couple of downsides there. The most important downside is understanding that when you're placing monies from a pre-tax account into a tax-free account, a 401k into a Roth IRA, you're going to have to pay those taxes when you're doing the conversion. So let's say if somebody had, in that example, that $1 million 401k account, and they decide I want to take the full 401k and do a conversion into that Roth IRA, it would show as if they made an extra $1 million that year. So they would be jolted into the highest tax bracket. They would be jolted to be paying higher taxes on those dollars. But ultimately, everything would be sitting in that Roth IRA account, but it could cost them thousands and thousands of dollars by not setting up this conversion strategy or this conversion plan the correct way. So like as an example, let's say if somebody had about 10 years out from retirement, they were eligible to do a 401k to Roth IRA conversion, and maybe they want to stay underneath the cusp of whatever their tax bracket is, and they want to say, okay, I want to convert $100,000 per year for the next 10 years so that, yes, the full $1 million will eventually come out of the 401k and go into the Roth, so that a Roth could be accentuated and basically growing tax-free, but they're not taking it all in one hit. So that's one way on how to do it. There's a couple of different ways that you could go and match it up to what you're trying to accomplish from your retirement needs to make sure that you're staying underneath the cusp and you're not hurting yourself by being jolted to the next tax bracket, meaning that you're going to be paying more taxes than really what you should have if you didn't have a plan, or if you did have a plan. And I'll touch up on those little aspects throughout the video. The number one reason why somebody would do this is for income. They understand that whenever they're taking retirement income, obviously, if something is tax-free, you're going to be able to net those dollars with 0% tax. So if somebody is, let's say, pulling $50,000 from a taxable account, or let's say they're taking $100,000, just for really easy math, from a taxable account, and they're sitting in a 30% tax bracket, the amount of money that they'll net from what that withdrawal was is $70,000, of all things being equal. So I'm just using a hypothetical example. Versus, let's say if somebody's pulling only $90,000 from a tax-free account, at the end of the year, they would be able to walk away with $90,000. So even though this number looks smaller, it produced a net positive, a higher result, more income to that individual's pocket. So that's the number one thing. Now, on top of it, there's different benefits that an individual could receive when they're taking out income from a Roth IRA. Because when you think of it conceptually, when you hit retirement years, what exactly is happening? Well, you're probably triggering Social Security income. If you're offered a pension, you might be triggering pension income. If you have rental properties, you might have rental income. And then there might be a specific gap that's sitting there if the Social Security, pension, rental income is less than how much your monthly expenses are, your annual expenses are. If there's a specific gap there, and you were able to accomplish that need by leveraging a Roth IRA account, so let's say if you have an expense gap, after all said and done, let's say Social Security is going to an individual for $30,000 per year, pension income is going to an individual for another $30,000 per year. Let's say this person does not receive rental income, and their expenses are $70,000 in a given year. Well, they're going to be falling short by $10,000. If somebody was able to create an income strategy with a Roth IRA, we know that they would need to take out withdrawals of $10,000 directly from that Roth IRA account. If they took it from a traditional IRA from their 401k, they would need to take out more than $10,000 because they have to incorporate their taxes, how much taxes they would owe on that pre-tax qualified retirement account. So that's obviously they'd be able to net more dollars. Also, because they're pulling out monies tax-free, that could reduce their retirement tax bracket as well. So simply put, if somebody's making income throughout their retirement, or they're receiving pension monies or monies from qualified retirement accounts, that's going to increase their tax bracket. That's going to increase their ordinary income for that year, what their taxable income is for that year. So if, let's say, they're right on the cusp of between tax brackets, between 20% or 25% or 30%, whatever the tax rates are at the time that the person is retiring, if they're taking out more monies during from the Roth IRA, that could make sure that it's keeping them within that lower tax bracket. The other aspect to that, really to piggyback off of it, is Social Security provisional income. A lot of individuals don't understand this because they're always just fixated on work. Okay, I'm working, I'm saving up my money, I'm working, I'm saving up my money, saving up my money, and I'm going to have some Social Security income that's going to be sitting there by the time I, hit earliest age 62, or maybe their full retirement age might be 66 and 2/3, whatever that case is. But ultimately, the Social Security is a type of income stream that somebody would be receiving if they, obviously paid into the Social Security system. With that, there's also ways on how that Social Security income gets taxed, and it's a calculation known as provisional income. So when someone's pulling monies from different investment accounts, when they're pulling monies from their qualified accounts, all that could increase the amount of provisional income calculator to be able to tax a Social Security income up to 85% of what that benefit is. So if somebody's pulling monies, and as the currently stands, obviously you could check this as you're reviewing this video, you could check which year, but as it currently stands, Roth IRA monies are not included in provisional income. So what that means is if somebody's pulling out monies from their Roth IRA and they're also receiving income from Social Security income, if that provisional income is less because they're taking money that's not incorporated into provisional income, it will allow them to net more of their Social Security dollars, thousands and thousands of more of their Social Security dollars that doesn't have to go to tax, as opposed to something that, somebody's just pulling monies from their 401k account as an example with a, pre-tax, a qualified retirement account, which is incorporated with provisional income. So there's these little slight tweaks that if you're taking monies from certain buckets and you're doing it the right way, that could actually allow you to net more monies from a continuous income stream that you're already eligible for, such as Social Security income. So I hope that all of that makes sense. From an income standpoint, this is really the most important aspect when it comes to retirement planning, is trying to make sure that you're creating some sort of strategy, or you have some sort of plan in place that's going to create a strategy that's going to allow your income where you're no longer working. You need to make sure that your assets, your pension income, your Social Security income, any other income sources are going to be greater than or equal to your expenses. If that's not the case, if you don't understand what your expenses are now, what your expenses will be in retirement, feel free to give us a call. We have budgeting sheets. We have advisors standing by to help you understand what those expenses are. Once we understand what those expenses are and we unravel, okay, what sort of income would you be receiving when you're no longer working? Because obviously when you hit retirement, you're no longer going to be working. Is this income going to be greater than or equal to the expenses? If it is, then you're going to be well ahead of the game. That's how individuals could have a successful retirement. If, let's say, it's less, well then how do you take monies from specific assets to make sure that you will accomplish what that gap is, to accomplish your need to make sure that the income throughout retirement is going to be greater than or equal to your expenses. Right when you figure that out, then the game of retirement becomes fun. Because if somebody is, let me clear off the screen. Let's say if somebody is receiving Social Security income of $30,000, maybe they're receiving pension income of $40,000, and their expenses each year are, let's say, $50,000. Maybe the pension has a cost of living adjustment. Maybe Social Security will constantly, increase the cost of living adjustment. Really just depends on the situation. But if all things being equal, obviously these are some different lifetime cash flows that are coming to that individual or coming to the individual and their spouse. $70,000 is higher than the $50,000 need. They're already ahead of the game. So if somebody had retirement assets, maybe 401k monies of $200,000, maybe Roth IRA monies of another $300,000 that's sitting there, that's $500,000 of additional assets that they don't have to leverage for an income need. Maybe now they want to leave some monies on the sideline for an emergency need, but the bulk of their dollars can now be fixated on a growth-related need. Something that will just use these accounts as essentially splurge accounts to make sure that they're growing at a consistent basis, beating out the pace of inflation. And if they want to use it as a vacation fund to travel, to visit grandkids, to just kind of have fun on the weekends, whatever that is, to create to get a golf membership, whatever somebody feels is their ideal retirement, that's what they would have as their leftover monies. So if somebody is not accomplishing this income need yet, well, then this is really the most difficult part, or this is where individuals typically fail throughout retirement, as they just hope that the market's going to be good to them, their accounts are going to be good to them, they're going to be able to pull out monies and not outlive their retirement savings. And that's not having a plan, that's just having a portfolio. So one of the most important things is having a plan. One of those plans could be making sure that you're doing the conversion from the 401k into the Roth IRA so you're able to net more income. A large hindrance when somebody has all these leftover monies is something known as required minimum distributions. 401k accounts and traditional IRA accounts, qualified retirement accounts, they have required minimum distributions. Roth IRA accounts do not, and non-qualified accounts do not. And reason being, and the whole concept behind a RMD, a required minimum distribution, is typically if somebody has money in a traditional IRA, they cannot pull their monies out until age 59 and a half. There used to be a rule with a required minimum distribution of 70 and a half. This has, a couple years ago, changed to 72. So what this says is an individual cannot start pulling out their monies from their traditional IRA until age 59 and a half, but they are forced to start pulling monies out, which has an increasing scale starting at age 72. So maybe at age 72, it might be 3%. At age 73, it might be 3.5%. At age 74, it might be 5%. So it's all based on what their overall qualified assets are that the government is forcing them that they have to start pulling out their retirement accounts to be able to spend it. Why would the government do that? Well, they do that because they know anytime you take monies from your account, you have to pay taxes on it. So they want to wait for your money to get as fat as possible, as large as possible, so that when you're taking out those withdrawals, when you take out those required minimum distributions, you're going to have to pay taxes on it each time. And then if you're taking out RMDs, that's going to increase the amount of money that could put you into the next tax bracket. That's also going to increase the amount of provisional income that could affect your Social Security income taxation as well. So everything has a trickle-down effect. This is why it's important to create the proper 401k to Roth IRA conversion strategy or traditional IRA to Roth IRA conversion strategy to make sure that you're eliminating these different mistakes, these common mistakes that individuals that just say, oh, you know what, just sitting in an old 401k account, I don't really care to touch it. Well, that could be shooting yourself in the foot. That could be, do you like giving money to the IRS? Do you like, paying more money in taxes? Because I haven't met anybody that does. So that's where, by creating a plan, you could go and make these slight little tweaks and put you in a much better mathematical position, give you much more flexibility, much more control off of how you want to live throughout your retirement, and then also how you want to pass down monies, to beneficiaries, upon your death as well. So that's where it would kind of lead me into the next thing, the inheritance standpoint. If somebody has their money in a 401k and they unfortunately pass away, all those monies would go to beneficiaries fully taxable. When somebody leaves their money in a Roth IRA and they pass away, they would leave those monies to their beneficiaries tax-free. So that's obviously a large difference, especially if you're just trying to take these monies, leave it on the sidelines and just say, hey, I grew this 401k account. I don't really need the income from it, but I just wanted to leave it to my loved ones. Well, you could be ultimately shooting them in the foot by just constantly kicking that can down the road. By making the responsible move to say, okay, well, let me do these slight conversions to make sure that you're staying underneath that tax bracket cusp. It's going to give you that more flexibility with the no required minimum distributions and could ultimately max out the inheritance to your loved ones or to, charities, however you want to do that, upon your passing. So, once again, the inheritance goal is it's not for everybody, but a lot of individuals do want to leave some sort of legacy to their loved ones. So that's why I want to kind of mention it, throughout this video, because that is important when you're looking at the difference between a qualified, 401k versus a, Roth IRA account. So briefly, the common mistakes that are made are individuals first and foremost is taking a full conversion. So like in that example, let's say if somebody's used to making $100,000 per year and they had, $500,000 in their 401k account, they're qualified to now roll these monies over into a Roth IRA and do a conversion to a Roth IRA, and they take the full $500,000, they dump that in there. If somebody made $100,000 that year, that would be equivalent to them now making $600,000 in that tax year. So they could jolt them into a higher bracket. On top of it being in a higher bracket, now they have to pay more in taxes off of that overall $600,000 that they quote unquote made for that year. So that's where maybe by, planning it out accordingly and say, okay, well, I'm just going to take out these little slivers and maybe say for the next 10 years, I'm going to, convert $50,000 per year into Roth IRA so that after 10 years, they'd be fully, converted over. that's, that could be an effective strategy, or maybe 100,000, or, 200,000 one year, 200,000 the next year, and then 100,000 the third year. So, there's different ways on how to really skin that cat, but just be mindful that a common mistake is when somebody just does the full conversion and they don't understand that they can't just do that without a repercussion. The repercussion is that they are now, because they're taking monies from a pre-tax account, placing into a tax-free account, they have to, claim those monies as ordinary income when they're doing the conversion. The other common mistake is not having a plan. There's different ways on how to make sure that these Roth conversions are set up properly so that it's netting more income for you, it's netting more growth for you, netting more inheritance for your loved ones, or for really who you want to deem as your beneficiaries. If you don't have a plan, well, then it's going to be very hard to do. Having a plan will alleviate that stress. It will alleviate that time. You might not have to work as long if you do these conversions the right way, because you know that it's going to result in more net income in your pocket by doing those conversions. So that's where obviously having a plan is more important than just having a portfolio. Too often we see individuals just having a portfolio. Too often we see individuals that just say, okay, I took my money, I took my 401k, I just rolled it into an IRA, I threw it with an investment advisor, he has my money in different stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and, charging about 1-2%, and, hopefully it's being managed correctly, and I'll just kind of, take his advice on growth, throughout my retirement years. Well, income might be important. Growth might be important. Inheritance might be important. That's why having a plan and making sure that you're structured and you're optimizing each little area correctly, that could be very effective and could result in you using thousands of less dollars to accomplish your goal than obviously if you didn't have the proper plan in place. The last common mistake that we see is when an individual thinks that they're eligible to roll over their 401k into a Roth IRA or into an IRA, and they're not. So it really just depends. Some companies allow their employees, when they hit an age-based in-service rollover or in-service withdrawal. So let's say if somebody hits age 59 and a half, some companies, some employers allow them to take their 401k and roll it out into a Roth IRA or roll it out into a traditional IRA. And then some individuals say, no, the only time that you could actually do the rollover is if you stop working for the company. So if somebody's 60 years old and they don't plan to stop work until they're 65, well, then they might have to stay put in that 401k plan, wait till age 65. Once they sever employment, that's when they could do the conversion in there, or that's when they could do the rollover in there. What we also notice is many times when somebody's working for multiple companies, they might have old 401k accounts that are just kind of sitting on the sidelines that they just left with an old employer. 10,000 here, 50,000 there, 100,000 there. And these are monies that now you could use. This could be advantageous for your position. You could say, okay, take your old 401k rollover because you're no longer working for that employer. You could take those monies and do conversions into traditional IRAs, or do rollovers to traditional IRAs, or do conversions into Roth IRAs. So that's another effective way. So it's not just saying your current employer plan. If you have old 401k monies or IRA money sitting there, those could be different ways on how to do that conversion. Make sure that you're netting the most amount of benefit to accomplish your retirement needs. So in closing, if you found value in this video, feel free to give our 1-800 number a call. It's 1-800-566-1002. You can visit the website at FosseFinancial.com or RetireSharp.com, and you also see a calendar link on the right-hand side that will basically pop up so you can schedule a time that's most convenient for your schedule. Now, the main reason why somebody would want to speak to an advisor, speak to a specialist, would be to really understand what your situation is. Help you understand what your goals are, help you understand what your budgeting analysis comes back at, and whether you should be making these slight tweaks and how to effectively leverage these conversion strategies to make sure that you can net more Social Security income, you can reduce your retirement tax bracket, try to eliminate the RMDs, and really just see the pros and cons of everything and see if it is something that would be beneficial for you. When we do look underneath the hood at your situation, really looking at your current point A to your point B, your ideal retirement date, and from point B until date of death, how to make sure that everything is most mathematical and scientifically appropriate to optimize your strategies. So like as an example, when you're trying to create an income strategy, use income-related accounts, income-based benefits or income-related tools that would be able to generate that income for you using the smallest amount of dollars only as much as necessary. When you're trying to leverage growth-related needs, make sure that it's something that's appropriate to your risk tolerance, not just based on your age and throwing you into a generic construct. Something that would say, okay, if this is your risk tolerance, this is what you feel, if you're risk averse, if you're risk tolerant with the market, maybe be more aggressive. If you're risk averse, be, more conservative. And, what are some of those different solutions? Because be mindful that a Roth IRA, doesn't just have to be an investment account. You go set that up into an insurance-related products. You set that up into bank-related products. You just have it sitting in a cash position. You can obviously set it up in different investments, stocks, bonds, ETFs, mutual funds, different things like that. And so you want all your different accounts to work like perfect puzzle pieces that are snapping together to give you that optimized plan. So, and that's what we try to help out. We have a trademark process known as the Retirement Diet Plan. D stands for distribution planning, I stands for investment planning, E stands for estate planning, and T, really what we just briefly covered in this video, stands for tax planning. If you are interested, once again, feel free to give us a call. If you want to see further videos, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Retire Sharp, so you can have access to the most updated videos. Thanks so much, guys.